The blood on Katherine Preston's apron had dried to rust before she even noticed it was there, her hands already reaching for fresh bandages as another wounded man stumbled through the doorway of her small clinic in Oroville, California, in the spring of 1878. She had stopped asking questions 3 months ago when the mining disputes turned violent, and men started showing up at all hours with gunshot wounds, knife slashes, and broken bones from saloon brawls that seemed to erupt like wildfires in drought season. Katherine simply cleaned, stitched, and bandaged whoever came through her door, accepting whatever payment they could offer or nothing at all when their pockets were empty. Her late husband, Thomas, had been a doctor before the fever took him 2 years prior, leaving her alone at 24 with his medical knowledge, his instruments, and a loneliness so profound it felt like another patient she could never quite heal. This particular stranger was different somehow. She noticed it immediately when he pushed through the door just after midnight, his tall frame swaying slightly, one hand pressed against his side where crimson seeped through his fingers and stained his tan shirt black in the lamplight. His hat had fallen off somewhere, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and when he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, something in Katherine's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with medical concern. "Madam," he said, his voice rough with pain but still carrying a gentleness that surprised her. "I apologize for the hour. Got nowhere else to go." Katherine was already moving, guiding him toward the examination table with practiced efficiency. "Sit down before you fall down. Let me see it." He complied without argument, which told her the wound was serious. Most cowboys had too much pride to follow orders so easily. When she peeled his hand away and lifted his shirt, she found a deep gash along his ribs, clean enough that it looked like a knife wound rather than a bullet. "What happened?" She began cleaning the wound with steady hands, ignoring how his muscles tensed under her touch. "Bar fight that got out of hand," he said, watching her face rather than her hands. "Other fellow had friends I did not account for. One had a blade." "You should be more careful about the company you keep," Katherine said, threading a needle with practiced ease. "This is going to hurt. Cannot hurt worse than it already does." But he gripped the edge of the table when she began stitching, his knuckles turning white though he made no sound. Katherine worked in silence, her movements efficient from years of practice, first as her husband's assistant and then on her own. The stranger was well built, clearly someone who worked hard for a living, and younger than she had first thought, probably around her own age. His face had the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the California sun, but his hands, though calloused, were clean, and something about the way he held himself suggested better breeding than most drifters who passed through Oroville. "You are not from around here," she observed, tying off the final stitch. "No, madam. Name is Russell Quinn. I have been working ranches up north, thought I would try my luck in the gold fields, but it seems the easy gold is long gone and what is left makes men mean." Katherine began wrapping clean bandages around his torso, acutely aware of how close she had to stand to complete the task. The gold rush brought out the worst in people. Those who stayed are often those with nowhere else to go or nothing else to lose. Which are you? The question was direct but not unkind. She met his eyes, surprised by her own honesty. "Both, I suppose." Russell did not push for more, which she appreciated. When she finished bandaging him, she stepped back to wash her hands in the basin, suddenly conscious of how she must look after a long day, her brown hair falling loose from its pins, exhaustion darkening the skin under her green eyes. "You need to keep that clean and dry," she said, falling back on professional distance. "Change the bandages daily. If you see any red streaks or it starts to smell foul, you need to come back immediately. Infection will kill you faster than the knife would have." Russell stood slowly, testing his movement. "What do I owe you?" $3 if you have it." He reached for his pocket with his good arm and pulled out a small leather pouch, counting out the coins with careful precision. When he handed them to her, his fingers brushed hers briefly, and Katherine felt that strange tightening in her chest again. "Thank you, Mrs. Preston," he said, reading the name painted on the window backward. "You are very skilled." "Miss," she corrected automatically, then wondered why it mattered. "I mean, I am a widow, was married. My husband was the doctor. I just assisted him, but I learned enough." Something shifted in Russell's expression, a softness around his eyes. "Then thank you, Miss Preston. I am grateful for your skill and your kindness at this hour." After he left, Katherine cleaned her instruments and changed her apron. But she found herself thinking about the cowboy with the gray eyes and the gentle voice even as she finally climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the clinic. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was just another patient, that she would likely never see him again. She was wrong. Russell Quinn returned 3 days later, just as the afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows. This time he was not bleeding and his color was better, though he moved carefully to protect his side. "Miss Preston," he greeted, removing his hat. "I wanted to check if you thought the wound was healing properly." It was a thin excuse, and they both knew it. Katherine gestured to the examination table and tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach as she unwrapped his bandages. The stitches looked clean, no sign of infection, the edges of the wound already beginning to knit together. "It is healing well," she said. "You have been taking care of it, following your instructions precisely." He watched her face again with that same focused attention. "Miss Preston, I wonder if I might ask you something." She stepped back, suddenly wary. "What is it? Would you allow me to bring you dinner sometime, as thanks for your help?" He spoke quickly as if expecting rejection. "There is a restaurant on Main Street that supposedly serves decent food, or if that is too forward, I could simply bring something here, so you would not have to cook after a long day of work." Katherine's immediate instinct was to refuse. She had built careful walls around herself since Thomas died, walls that kept her safe from more loss and more pain. But something about Russell Quinn made her want to say yes, made her want to remember what it felt like to have someone care whether she ate a proper meal or not. The restaurant would be acceptable, she heard herself say. "Tomorrow evening, if that suits you." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise. "Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock," she agreed, and after he left she stood in the empty clinic wondering what she had just done. That night, Katherine lay awake thinking about the choices that had brought her to this moment. She had met Thomas Preston when she was 19, a doctor 15 years her senior who had swept through her small Nevada town like a force of nature. Her parents had approved of the match, pleased their daughter would marry an educated man with prospects, and Katherine had been too young to understand the difference between respect and love. Thomas had been kind but distant, more interested in his work than in his wife, and their marriage had been cordial but empty. When the fever took him after only 3 years, Katherine had mourned the loss of security more than the man himself, a truth that still filled her with guilt. She had come to Oroville because it was far enough from Nevada to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that the journey was manageable. The town needed medical help, and she had the knowledge if not the official qualifications. For 2 years, she had existed in a strange limbo, neither fully alive nor entirely dead inside, going through the motions of life without really living it. And now here was Russell Quinn, a wounded stranger who looked at her like she was worth looking at, who had smiled when she agreed to dinner as if she had given him something precious. It terrified her. The next evening, Katherine changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She pinned her hair more carefully than usual and allowed herself the vanity of a touch of rose water at her wrists. When Russell arrived precisely at 6, wearing a clean shirt and with his hair still damp from washing, the look in his eyes made her glad she had made the effort. The restaurant was modest but clean, run by a Chinese family who had stayed after the railroad work dried up. Russell held her chair and ordered with quiet confidence, and as they waited for their food, Katherine found herself genuinely curious about this man. "You said you worked ranches up north," she prompted. "What brought you to California?" Russell leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "My father has a small ranch in Montana, but I have 3 older brothers who will inherit. I needed to make my own way, and the West seemed like the place to do it. I have been working my way south for the past 2 years, learning what I could, saving what I managed to earn. And the gold fields." He laughed, a warm sound that made something in Katherine's chest ease. "A foolish dream. I realized quickly that the real money now is in supplying the miners, not in mining itself. I have been thinking about starting a freight business, hauling supplies between the camps and the towns. It is hard work but honest." "That sounds like a solid plan," Katherine said, meaning it. "Oroville is well positioned for that kind of business." "What about you?" Russell asked. "What brought you here?" She had not planned to tell him everything, but somehow the words came. She explained about Thomas, about learning medicine at his side, about the fever and the loneliness that followed. Russell listened with complete attention, never interrupting, his eyes full of an understanding that suggested he knew something about loss himself. "My mother died when I was 12, he said when she finished. "Childbirth. The baby died too. My father never remarried, said he could not imagine trying to replace her. I understood better as I got older what he meant. Some people leave a hole that cannot be filled by anyone else." "But you still have to live," Katherine said quietly. "Even with the hole." "Yes," Russell agreed. "You still have to live." The food arrived and they ate in companionable silence for a while, but Katherine found herself watching Russell when she thought he was not looking. There was something solid about him, dependable, the kind of man who did what he said he would do. It was attractive in a way that had nothing to do with his handsome face or strong build. "Tell me something that makes you happy," Russell said suddenly. "Something besides work." The question caught her off guard. "I used to paint," she said slowly, remembering. "Watercolors mostly. I have not picked up a brush in years." "Why not?" "I suppose because it seemed frivolous. After Thomas died, everything became about survival, about keeping the clinic running, about staying busy enough that I did not have to think too much." The admission felt dangerous, like showing him a vulnerable part of herself she usually kept hidden. Russell set down his fork, his expression serious. "Miss Preston, may I speak plainly?" She nodded, her heart beating faster. "I think you are the strongest woman I have ever met. You have built a life here on your own. You help people who cannot always help themselves, and you do it with grace and skill. But strength does not mean denying yourself every small joy. If painting made you happy, you should paint again." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "You hardly know me." "Then I hope you will let me remedy that." They talked until the restaurant began closing, and Russell walked her back to the clinic through streets lit by oil lamps and starlight. At her door, he did not try to kiss her, just took her hand gently and held it for a moment. "Thank you for dinner and the company," Katherine said, not wanting the evening to end. "The pleasure was entirely mine. Might I see you again? I would like that. Tomorrow." The hope in his voice made her smile. Tomorrow. Over the following weeks, Russell Quinn became a fixture in Katherine's life. He came by the clinic most afternoons, sometimes with a legitimate need to check his healing wound, but often with flimsier excuses. He brought her lunch when she forgot to eat. He fixed a broken window frame she had been meaning to repair for months. He sat in the corner and talked to her while she worked, his presence comforting rather than intrusive. Katherine found herself counting the hours until she would see him again, found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself caring about things beyond the next patient and the next day. Russell told her about his dreams for the freight business, showing her the calculations he had made, the routes he had mapped out. She helped him compose letters to potential investors and cheered when he secured his first contract hauling supplies to a mining camp in the hills. "I am going to need to be away for 3 days," he said one evening as they sat on the bench outside her clinic, watching the sun set over the mountains. "The run to Silver Creek and back. Will you miss me?" Katherine turned to look at him, this man who had somehow become essential to her happiness without her quite noticing when it happened. "Yes," she admitted. "I will miss you very much." Russell reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Katherine, I need to tell you something." The use of her first name sent warmth through her. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." The words were simple, direct, and utterly sincere. "I know it has not been long, and I know you have lost before, and I would never want to rush you or pressure you. But I wanted you to know that my feelings are real and they are serious. If you need time, I will give you time. If you need space, I will give you space. But I am not going anywhere unless you send me away." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. She had been so careful, so guarded, so determined not to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But Russell had slipped past her defenses with his kindness and his honesty and his way of seeing her as more than just the widow running the clinic. "I am frightened," she whispered. "What if something happens to you? What if I lose you too?" Russell lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "We cannot live our lives in fear of what might happen. I could get thrown from a horse tomorrow. You could catch some illness from a patient. The whole town could burn down. We cannot control any of that, but we can control whether we let fear steal whatever happiness we might have today. When did you become so wise?" She tried to smile through the tears that finally spilled over. "I had a lot of time to think while you were stitching me up that first night," he said, reaching up to wipe her tears away with his thumb. "I kept thinking that if I was going to die from a stupid knife wound, I would regret not taking more chances, not telling people how I felt, not living fully in every moment I had." Katherine leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first night. It terrifies me." "Then we will be terrified together," Russell said gently. "But Katherine, I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to come back to you every time I leave. I will be careful and smart, and I will not take foolish risks. And I will spend every day I have showing you that you are worth loving, that opening your heart again was the right choice." When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Katherine kissed him back, letting herself feel hope for the first time in years, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. The 3 days Russell was gone felt like 3 weeks. Katherine threw herself into work, treating a burned hand, a bad cough, a pregnant woman with concerning swelling. But at night, lying alone in her bed, she found herself praying harder than she had since Thomas died, asking God or fate or whatever powers existed to keep Russell safe and bring him home. When he finally returned, dusty and tired but grinning, Katherine abandoned all propriety and ran into his arms right there on Main Street. Russell caught her and lifted her off her feet, laughing into her hair. "I missed you too," he said, setting her down but not letting go. "How was the run?" She stepped back just enough to look him over, checking for injuries with a nurse's eye. Successful. Made good time, got paid promptly, and already have 2 more runs contracted for next month. Katherine, this could really work. I could build something here. We could build something here, she corrected, and watched joy light up his face. That night, Russell stayed for dinner in Katherine's small apartment above the clinic. She cooked a simple meal of chicken and vegetables while he told her about the mining camps, about the men desperate for news from town, about the opportunities he saw for expansion. After dinner, he helped her wash dishes, and the domestic intimacy of it made Katherine's heart ache in the best way. "I want to court you properly," Russell said as they dried the last plate. "I want to do this right. I know people probably talk already, seeing me around so much, and I would not want to damage your reputation." Katherine set down the dish towel and turned to face him. "Russell Quinn, I am a 26-year-old widow who stitches up miners and cowboys in the middle of the night. My reputation has never been conventional, but if you want to court me properly, I would be honored to be courted." His kiss was less gentle this time, deeper and more urgent, and Katherine let herself sink into it, let herself feel the desire she had been carefully controlling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Russell rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to leave. "You should," Katherine agreed, not stepping back. "Katherine Preston, you are going to be the death of me in the most wonderful way." She laughed and gently pushed him toward the door. "Go home, Russell. Get some rest. Come see me tomorrow. Tomorrow and every day after if you will have me." True to his word, Russell courted her properly over the following months. He took her to church on Sundays, where the congregation buzzed with interest at seeing the reclusive nurse on the arm of the handsome freighter. He brought her flowers when he could find them and interesting rocks from the trail when he could not. He read to her in the evenings from a battered copy of Shakespeare he kept in his saddlebag, his voice turning the words into music. Katherine bloomed under his attention. She bought watercolor supplies and started painting again, capturing the gold hills and wide skies of California. She let herself laugh freely and dress in colors brighter than the practical grays and browns she had worn for years. She talked to her patients with more warmth, seeing them as people rather than just medical problems to solve. The town of Oroville noticed the change. Mrs. Chen from the restaurant made a point of telling Katherine that love suited her. Mr. Palmer at the general store smiled knowingly when she bought fabric for a new dress. Even gruff old Doc Harrison, who rode in once a month from Chico to handle the medical cases Katherine could not, commented that she seemed happier than he had ever seen her. "That freighter fellow treating you right?" he asked one day, watching her efficiently splint a broken finger. "He is," Katherine said simply. "Good. You deserve some happiness after these hard years. Thomas Preston was a brilliant doctor but a cold husband. I always thought you deserved better." The validation from someone who had known her marriage surprised Katherine, but she realized she had been so busy pretending everything was fine that she had never acknowledged to anyone how lonely she had been even before Thomas died. Russell's freight business grew steadily. He hired 2 men to help with the runs and bought a second wagon. He started talking about buying land, building a proper warehouse, maybe even starting a passenger service between the mining camps. Katherine loved watching him plan and dream, loved that he always included her in his visions of the future. "I was thinking about that plot of land east of town," he said one evening as they walked along the creek that ran past Oroville. "It has good access to the road and enough space to expand. I could build the warehouse there, and there would be room for a house too. A real house with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen." "That sounds wonderful," Katherine said, trying to keep the wistfulness from her voice. Russell talked about the future, but he had not specifically asked her to be part of it, and she would not presume. Russell stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The late summer sun turned his hair copper and made his gray eyes silver. "Katherine, I am asking this badly and not how I planned, but I cannot wait any more. I love you. I love your strength and your compassion and your laugh and the way you bite your lip when you concentrate. I love how you see the best in people and how you never give up on anyone. I want to build that house for us. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to give you the family and the happiness you deserve. Will you marry me?" Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Russell, I will marry you." He kissed her there beside the creek, and Katherine felt like her heart might burst from joy. This was so different from her first engagement, when Thomas had asked her father's permission and then informed her of the arrangement. Russell was asking her, choosing her, loving her for exactly who she was. "I do not have a ring yet," Russell said, pulling back to look at her. "I wanted to ask you first to make sure you said yes before I spent the money." "Is that terrible?" Katherine laughed through her tears. "That is practical and thoughtful. We can choose one together." "We could use the money for the house instead," Russell suggested, "if you do not mind. A ring is just a symbol, but a home is something real we can build together." "I do not need a ring," Katherine assured him. "I just need you." They set the wedding for October, giving Russell time to finish his contracted runs and Katherine time to prepare. She made her own dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar, and Russell's mother sent a beautiful shawl that had belonged to his grandmother. The whole town seemed excited about the wedding, with people Katherine barely knew offering congratulations and help. Mrs. Chen insisted on making the wedding cake. Mr. Palmer donated ribbons and flowers. Even the rough miners who came through Katherine's clinic with various injuries seemed pleased that their nurse had found happiness. One old prospector who came in with an infected cut spent his entire appointment asking Russell about his intentions and making sure he would treat Katherine right. "I promise you, sir, I will spend my life making her happy," Russell said with complete sincerity, and the old man nodded his approval. The night before the wedding, Katherine had dinner with Russell at the restaurant, their last evening as unmarried people. She found herself studying his face, memorizing every detail, overwhelmed by gratitude that this man had stumbled into her clinic 6 months ago. "What are you thinking?" Russell asked, catching her staring. "That I cannot believe this is real," Katherine admitted. "That I am marrying you tomorrow, that my life could change so completely in such a short time." Russell reached across the table to take her hand. "Do you have any doubts?" "No," she said firmly. "Not a single one. Do you?" "Not even a shadow of one." "Katherine, marrying you is the surest thing I have ever done in my life." The wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon, the California sky a brilliant blue, the heat of summer finally broken. Katherine walked herself down the aisle of the small church, not because she had no one to give her away, but because she wanted Russell to see that she was choosing this freely, coming to him of her own will and desire. When Russell saw her, his eyes went wide and then filled with tears. He wiped them away unashamedly, and Katherine felt her own eyes sting in response. The ceremony was simple, presided over by the circuit preacher who came through once a month, but every word felt weighted with meaning. When Russell said, "I do," his voice rang clear and strong. When Katherine said the same, she felt years of loneliness and fear finally release their hold on her heart. Their kiss as husband and wife was chaste given the setting, but the promise in it was unmistakable. The congregation cheered and Katherine laughed with pure joy as Russell led her back down the aisle, her hand tucked securely in his arm. The reception was held in the restaurant, with more food than seemed possible and music provided by a fiddler who worked at one of the mining camps. Russell danced with Katherine until her feet hurt, and then they danced some more. Watching him laugh with the townspeople, seeing him so happy and full of life, Katherine felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her. This man was hers now, and she was his, and she would do everything in her power to build a good life with him. As the evening wound down, Russell leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Quinn?" The new name sent shivers through her. "Yes, Mr. Quinn, take me home." Russell had prepared the apartment above the clinic with candles and fresh flowers, and the thoughtfulness of it made Katherine's eyes sting with happy tears yet again. He was gentle with her that night, patient and loving, and Katherine discovered that intimacy with someone you truly loved was entirely different from dutiful marital relations. She fell asleep in Russell's arms feeling cherished and safe, and when she woke in the morning to find him watching her with soft eyes, she knew she had made the right choice. "Good morning, wife," Russell said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good morning, husband," Katherine replied, testing out the words. They felt good, felt right. They spent their first few weeks as a married couple figuring out how to share space and merge their lives. Russell moved his few belongings into the apartment, and they rearranged furniture to accommodate 2 people instead of 1. He continued his freight runs but came home every night he was in town, and Katherine continued working at the clinic, but with a lightness she had not felt in years. In November, Russell finalized the purchase of the land east of town and started making plans for the warehouse and house. He showed Katherine his sketches every evening, incorporating every suggestion she made, determined that their home would be exactly what she wanted. "I want a big kitchen," Katherine said, studying the plans, "and a room that could serve as an office or clinic in case people need help and cannot make it into town." "Done and done," Russell agreed, making notes. "What about a porch? Somewhere we could sit in the evening and watch the sunset." "That sounds perfect." They broke ground on the warehouse in December, and Russell worked like a man possessed whenever he was not out on a run. Katherine helped when she could, bringing him lunch and water, holding boards while he hammered. Watching the building take shape gave her a satisfaction she had never felt before. The knowledge that they were building something together, creating a future with their own hands. The winter was mild, which allowed construction to continue steadily. By February, the warehouse was complete, and Russell was able to move his business operations out of the rented barn he had been using. The increased efficiency allowed him to take on more contracts, and the money started coming in faster. "We could start on the house next month," Russell said one evening, going over the accounts with Katherine. "I have enough saved now to buy all the materials and still have a cushion for emergencies." Katherine looked at the numbers, her mind automatically calculating. "What if we waited another 2 months? We could add that extra bedroom you wanted and still have money left over." Russell set down his pen and looked at her curiously. "Katherine, is there something you are not telling me?" She had been waiting for the right moment, but she realized there would never be a more perfect time than this, sitting together at their small table, planning their future. "I think I might be pregnant." The joy that spread across Russell's face was like watching the sun rise. "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain. I have all the signs and I know my own body. I would estimate I am about 2 months along, which means the baby would arrive in early September." Russell stood up so fast his chair fell over, but he did not care, just pulled Katherine into his arms and held her tight. "We are going to have a baby. Katherine, we are going to have a baby." She laughed and clung to him, feeling his heart racing against her cheek. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "Are you happy? Is this what you want?" "More than anything," Katherine assured him. "I never got to have children with Thomas. He was always too busy and then he was gone. I had given up on the idea. But with you, Russell, I want everything. I want the house and the family and the whole beautiful life we are building together." They started construction on the house in April, with Russell insisting that Katherine do nothing more strenuous than supervise. She protested that she was pregnant, not fragile, but she secretly appreciated his protectiveness. As her belly began to round, the townspeople became even more invested in the young couple's happiness. Women who had barely spoken to Katherine before started stopping by with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Mrs. Chen taught her how to make a traditional Chinese broth that was supposed to be good for pregnant women. The house rose slowly through the spring and summer, taking shape room by room. Russell worked on it every spare moment, determined to have it finished before the baby arrived. His hired men helped when they could, and even some of the miners pitched in on their days off, grateful for how Katherine had patched them up over the years. By August, the house was nearly complete. It was not a mansion, but it was solid and well built, with the big kitchen Katherine wanted, the office for her medical work, 3 bedrooms, and the wide porch perfect for watching sunsets. Russell carried her over the threshold even though they were already married, and Katherine cried happy tears as she walked through their new home. "It is perfect," she said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the kitchen table Russell had built himself. "Russell, it is absolutely perfect." "Nothing but the best for my family," he said, one hand resting gently on her swollen belly. They moved in immediately, and Katherine spent the final weeks of her pregnancy arranging their possessions, setting up the nursery, preparing for the baby's arrival. She trained Mrs. Chen's daughter Mai, a bright 18-year-old with an interest in medicine, to help at the clinic so Katherine would have assistance after the baby came. Russell stopped taking long-distance runs in late August, unwilling to be more than an hour from Katherine's side. On a hot afternoon in early September, Katherine's water broke while she was organizing medical supplies. She felt the familiar tightness begin in her belly and called for Russell with impressive calm. "It is time," she said when he came running. "The baby is coming." Russell went pale but held it together admirably. "What do you need?" "What should I do?" "Get Mai from the clinic," Katherine instructed, breathing through a contraction. "And Mrs. Chen. Then boil water and get the clean linens from the chest in our room." The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the following day. Russell stayed by Katherine's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her she was strong and brave even when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. Mrs. Chen and Mai handled the medical aspects with calm competence while Russell provided moral support. When the baby finally arrived in the early afternoon, a healthy boy with a loud cry and a shock of dark hair, Katherine wept with relief and joy. Russell cried too, cradling his son with shaking hands, looking at Katherine like she had given him the moon and stars. "He is perfect," Russell breathed. "Katherine, he is absolutely perfect. You are perfect." They named him Thomas Russell Quinn, honoring both of Katherine's husbands, the one who had taught her medicine and the one who had taught her love. Little Tommy was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in decent stretches, and Katherine found herself falling into the rhythms of motherhood with surprising ease. Russell was a devoted father from the first moment, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Tommy when he fussed, singing him to sleep with old cowboy songs. Watching him with their son, Katherine fell in love with him all over again in an entirely new way. "You are going to spoil him," she said one evening, finding Russell sitting on the porch with Tommy asleep on his chest, both of them bathed in the gold light of sunset. "That is my right as his father," Russell said with a grin. "Besides, you can be the strict one." Katherine sat down in the chair next to him, reaching over to run a gentle finger across Tommy's soft cheek. "I never knew I could be this happy. Sometimes it scares me, like it is too much and something will come along to take it away." Russell shifted Tommy carefully and reached for Katherine's hand. "I know what you mean. But Katherine, we cannot live in fear of what might happen. We just have to hold tight to what we have and be grateful for every day we get. That is all any of us can do. When did you get so wise?" she asked, echoing her words from that long-ago evening when he first told her he loved her. "I had a very good teacher," Russell replied, bringing her hand to his lips. The first year of Tommy's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Katherine split her time between caring for her son and working at the clinic, with Mai taking on more responsibilities as her skills grew. Russell's business continued to thrive, and he was able to hire a third man to help with the runs, which meant he could spend more time at home. Tommy took his first steps in the kitchen, lurching from Katherine's arms to Russell's with a look of surprised delight. His first word was "Papa," which Russell crowed about for days until Tommy said "Mama" and even the score. He was a happy, curious child, fascinated by everything around him, and Katherine loved watching him discover the world. When Tommy was 18 months old, Katherine realized she was pregnant again. She told Russell over dinner, watching his face light up with the same joy as the first time. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Tommy is going to be a big brother." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, even though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Katherine, every day with you makes me happy. Every new blessing we receive is more than I ever dreamed I would have. Yes, I am happy. I am the happiest man alive." Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1881, an easy birth compared to Tommy's marathon labor. They named her Sarah Marie Quinn, after Russell's mother, and she was tiny and perfect with Katherine's green eyes and Russell's dark hair. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and Russell had to carefully supervise to make sure the toddler's enthusiastic affection did not overwhelm the infant. With 2 children, life became busier and more chaotic, but also richer and fuller than Katherine had ever imagined possible. The house they had built rang with laughter and sometimes tears, with the sounds of childhood and family. Katherine's clinic continued to serve Oroville and the surrounding mining camps, but she cut back her hours to focus on her children, comfortable that Mai could handle most routine cases. Russell's freight business became one of the most successful in the region. He expanded into passenger transport as he had dreamed, running a regular stage line between Oroville and the mountain camps. He hired carefully, choosing men who were reliable and honest, and his reputation for dependability meant he never lacked for contracts. As the children grew, Katherine made sure they understood the value of education and hard work. Tommy was bright and curious, always asking questions, while Sarah was more thoughtful and observant. Both children adored their father and followed him around the warehouse whenever they could, and Russell was endlessly patient with their questions and their help. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Russell took Katherine on a picnic to the place by the creek where he had proposed. The children stayed with Mrs. Chen, giving them a rare afternoon alone. As they sat on a blanket watching the water flow past, Katherine reflected on how much her life had changed since that night Russell stumbled into her clinic with a knife wound in his side. "What are you thinking about?" Russell asked, catching her expression. "How lucky I am," Katherine said simply. 5 years ago I was so lonely I could barely function. I went through the motions of life, but I was not really living. And then you came along and everything changed." Russell pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I was the lucky one. I could have died that night if I had not found you. Instead, I found the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. You healed more than just my wound, Katherine. You healed my loneliness too. I had not realized how alone I was until I met you." "We healed each other," Katherine said, leaning into his warmth. "We did," Russell agreed. "And we built something beautiful together. Not just the house or the business, but a life, a family, a home. That is more than I ever thought I would have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the wind in the trees. Finally, Russell spoke again. "I want to tell you something. I have been thinking about it for a while, and I want your opinion before I do anything." Katherine sat up to look at him. "What is it?" "You know how many men come through the mining camps with injuries, and no way to get proper medical care. I was thinking that maybe we could use some of the money the business is bringing in to set up a small clinic up in Silver Creek. It is the biggest camp and the most central. We could pay Mai to run it and maybe train another young person to assist her. You could ride up once a month to supervise and handle the difficult cases. What do you think?" Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. This man, her husband, who had more than enough to worry about with his own business, was thinking about how to help others. "I think that is a wonderful idea. I think it would save lives and give Mai a chance to really use her skills. I think you are the best man I have ever known, Russell Quinn." "I learned from the best," he said, pulling her in for a kiss. The clinic in Silver Creek opened 6 months later, a simple building but well stocked with supplies and equipment. Mai ran it with competent authority, and Katherine made the monthly ride up to check on things and handle complicated cases. The miners were grateful for the reliable medical care, and word spread. Soon, other camps were asking if they could have clinics too. Over the next 5 years, Russell and Katherine opened 3 more small clinics in mining camps throughout the region, each one staffed by a nurse or apprentice doctor they had trained. It became Katherine's passion project, ensuring that even the most remote workers had access to medical care. Russell supported her fully, providing the buildings and supplies through his business, proud of what his wife was accomplishing. Tommy grew into a smart, responsible boy who loved learning and had a natural head for numbers. By age 8, he was helping his father with accounting for the freight business. Sarah was artistic and gentle, with her mother's compassion and her father's determination. She loved helping in the clinic, carefully organizing supplies and talking soothingly to nervous patients. In the fall of 1886, Katherine realized she was pregnant again. At 34, she had thought her childbearing years might be over, but here was another blessing she had not anticipated. Russell was as overjoyed as ever, and Tommy and Sarah were excited about having another sibling. "Maybe it will be twins this time," Tommy suggested seriously. "Then we would have 4 children at once." "Let us hope for just one," Katherine laughed. "I am getting too old for this." "You are perfect," Russell said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her still flat belly. "Whatever this baby is, boy or girl, single or twins, they will be perfect because they are ours." The pregnancy was harder than her previous 2, with more fatigue and discomfort, but Katherine was still healthy and strong. She cut back her work at the clinics, focusing on her family and preparing for the new baby. Russell hovered even more than usual, constantly asking if she needed anything, making sure she rested enough. Their 3rd child arrived in early May of 1887, another boy they named James Edward Quinn after Russell's father. He was a big baby with powerful lungs, and from the first moment He clearly had his own strong opinions about everything. Katherine loved him fiercely, marveling that after all these years, she still found room in her heart to love another child just as much as the others. Tommy, now 9, was old enough to be genuinely helpful with the baby. Sarah, at 6, treated little James like her own personal doll, constantly wanting to hold him and sing to him. Russell walked around with a permanent smile, his family complete, his cup overflowing. As Katherine held her newborn son and watched her husband playing with their older children, she thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago. That lonely, grieving widow would never have believed that such happiness was possible, that life could be so full and rich. Every day she woke up grateful, grateful for the man who had stumbled into her clinic bleeding and in pain, grateful for the love they had built together, grateful for the family that love had created. "What are you thinking about?" Russell asked that evening after the children were asleep. He sat down next to Katherine's bed, where she was resting with baby James in her arms. "About how much I love you," Katherine said simply. "About how you saved me without even knowing I needed saving. About how healing your wound that night healed something in me too." Russell leaned over to kiss her softly. "You saved me right back. I was drifting, Katherine, going through life without any real purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something lasting. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "We are the best thing that ever happened to each other," Katherine corrected. "We were meant to find each other." The years continued to pass in a blur of school performances and birthday celebrations, of watching children grow and businesses thrive. Russell's freight and passenger line became the most reliable in Northern California, and the network of clinics Katherine had started earned her a reputation as a visionary in rural medical care. A journalist from San Francisco even came to interview her about her work, and the resulting article brought inquiries from other communities wanting to replicate the model. Tommy grew into a serious young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. By 16, he was essentially running the day-to-day operations of the freight business, freeing Russell to focus on expansion and long-term planning. Sarah developed into a skilled nurse, working alongside her mother in the Oroville clinic and showing a particular talent for dealing with difficult patients. James was the wild one, always climbing things and getting into trouble, but with a charm that made it impossible to stay angry with him. In 1895, when Katherine was 43 and Russell 42, they sat on the porch of the house they had built together and watched the sunset paint the California hills gold and crimson. Tommy was in town courting a nice girl whose family ran the general store. Sarah was inside making dinner with James's reluctant help. Everything was peaceful and perfect. "You ever wish things had been different?" Katherine asked suddenly. "That you had not gotten into that bar fight, that you had never come to my clinic?" Russell turned to look at her, surprised. "Not for a single second. Why would you ask that?" "I just think sometimes about how random it all was. If you had gone to a different town, if you had been more careful that night, if I had been out on a call when you came by, we might never have met. Our whole life together hangs on that one moment of chance." Russell reached for her hand, his touch as familiar and comforting as ever. "I do not believe it was chance. I think we were meant to find each other. Maybe not the way it happened, with me bleeding all over your floor, but somehow, some way. You were meant to heal me, and I was meant to show you that life could be good again. Everything else followed from that." Katherine squeezed his hand, looking at the face she had loved for 17 years, the gray at his temples and the lines around his eyes that came from years of laughter and sun. "I love you, Russell Quinn. I love the life we have built and the family we have made. I love that you still look at me the way you did that first night. "I will always look at you that way," Russell promised. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and you still take my breath away every single day." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting in the wild, beautiful country of California. Behind them, in the house filled with laughter and love, their children moved through the evening routines, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and wanted. Around them, in the town and the mining camps and the wilderness beyond, people benefited from the compassion and vision Katherine and Russell had brought to their community. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine rested her head on Russell's shoulder and thought about healing. She had spent so many years focused on healing bodies, on stitching wounds and setting bones and fighting fevers. But the most important healing she had ever done was letting Russell Quinn heal the loneliness in her heart. And in doing so, she had healed his as well. They had saved each other, these two wounded souls, and from that mutual salvation had grown a love that was strong and true and lasting. It was not the life Katherine had imagined for herself all those years ago when she first came to Oroville, alone and grieving. It was better than anything she could have imagined. The children grew and eventually left to build their own lives. Tommy took over the freight business completely, expanding it into neighboring counties and earning the same reputation for reliability and honesty that his father had built. He married the general store owner's daughter, and they gave Katherine and Russell their first grandchildren, twin boys who had Russell's gray eyes and Tommy's serious demeanor. Sarah opened a nursing school in Sacramento, training young women in the latest medical techniques and sending them out to serve communities throughout California. She married a young doctor she met through her work, a kind man who shared her passion for rural medicine. They had 3 daughters who all followed their mother into nursing. James went east to college and came back with a degree in engineering. He used his knowledge to design better roads and bridges, making travel safer and easier throughout the region. He married a schoolteacher and they settled in Oroville, close to his parents, with their 4 children constantly underfoot at the big house east of town. As Katherine and Russell grew older, they gradually handed over their various business interests to their children and retired to focus on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. Russell built a rocking chair big enough for 2, and they spent countless evenings on the porch, talking and reminiscing and watching the world go by. "We did all right, did we not?" Russell said one evening when he was 60 and Katherine was 61. "With the children and the business and everything, we did more than all right," Katherine assured him. "We built something wonderful. Look at our children, Russell. Look at how they turned out. They are good people doing good things in the world. That is our legacy." "You are my legacy," Russell said, turning to look at her. "You and the love we built together. Everything else is just details." Katherine leaned over to kiss him, still feeling the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first night when he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "I love you, Russell Quinn. I have loved you from the beginning and I will love you until the end. And beyond," Russell added. "Love like ours does not end just because life does. Whatever comes after, we will be together there too." The seasons turned and the years passed. Katherine continued to supervise her network of clinics well into her 60s, finally retiring only when her hands became too unsteady to stitch wounds reliably. Russell stayed active with the business until a fall from his horse at 65 forced him to slow down. They filled their days with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with friends and community activities, with quiet moments together. In the spring of 1915, Russell fell ill with pneumonia. Katherine nursed him with all the skills she had developed over 40 years of medical practice, but at 74, His body could not fight the infection. On a sunny afternoon, with Katherine holding his hand and their children gathered around, Russell Quinn closed his eyes for the last time. Katherine's grief was profound but not desperate. They had been married for 37 years, had built a beautiful life together, had loved each other well and truly. She missed him terribly, but she did not feel abandoned. Russell had kept his promise from that long-ago evening when he first told her he loved her. He had come back to her every single time until death was the only thing strong enough to separate them. She lived another 3 years, long enough to see the end of the Great War and to hold her first great-great-grandchild. She continued to paint until the very end, her watercolors becoming increasingly abstract and dreamlike. The clinic in Oroville, now run by Sarah's youngest daughter, bore a plaque honoring Katherine Preston Quinn for her pioneering work in rural medicine. On a warm evening in August 1918, Katherine Preston Quinn died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 66. She was buried next to Russell in the cemetery overlooking Oroville, under a headstone that read, "She healed bodies and hearts. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, friend." At the funeral, Tommy spoke about his parents' love story, about how his father had stumbled into his mother's clinic wounded and bleeding, and how from that chance meeting had grown something remarkable. He talked about the house they had built together, the business they had grown, the family they had raised. But mostly he talked about the love that had been the foundation of everything else, a love so strong and true that it had transformed 2 lonely people into pillars of their community. "My father used to say that they healed each other," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "He healed her loneliness and she healed his. And from that healing came all the good they did in the world. That is their legacy. That is what they leave behind." Years later, when the old house east of Oroville was finally torn down to make way for a modern medical center, workers found a box of letters tucked away in a closet. They were love letters, dozens of them, written by Russell to Katherine during his freight runs and by Katherine to Russell when he was away. The letters were full of the mundane details of daily life, but also profound declarations of love and gratitude. The final letter, written by Russell just days before his death, ended with these words: "Katherine, my beloved wife, you are and always have been the best part of my life. If I could live it all again, I would change nothing except perhaps to find you sooner. Thank you for seeing me that night when I stumbled into your clinic. Thank you for healing my wound and my heart. Thank you for every day, every moment, every breath we have shared. I love you beyond measure, beyond time, beyond everything. Yours always, Russell." The letters were donated to the Oroville Historical Society, where they remain to this day, a testament to a love that began with a chance meeting and grew into something extraordinary. People still visit the society to read them, to be reminded that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Old West, love could flourish. That 2 wounded souls could find each other and build something beautiful. That healing someone's body could lead to healing their heart, and that the simple act of caring for a stranger could change the course of 2 lives forever. The story of Katherine Preston and Russell Quinn became part of Oroville's history, told and retold to new generations. It reminded people that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that healing takes many forms, and that 2 people together can build something far greater than either could build alone. Their descendants continue to live in California, carrying forward the values of compassion, hard work, and service that Katherine and Russell had embodied. The medical center built on the site of their house became one of the best in Northern California, a fitting tribute to the woman who had started with nothing but her late husband's medical instruments and her own determination. A scholarship fund established in Russell's name helped young people pursue careers in transportation and logistics, keeping his legacy of connecting communities alive. But perhaps the most important legacy was simpler and more personal. It was in the grandchildren who remembered sitting on that big rocking chair, squeezed in between two people who still held hands after decades of marriage. It was in the great-grandchildren who heard stories about a time when California was still wild, when their ancestors had built businesses and families from nothing but determination and love. It was in the knowledge that such love was possible, that two people could truly heal each other's loneliness and build a life together that mattered. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the California hills painting them gold and crimson, people in Oroville still sometimes talk about the nurse and the cowboy who found each other by chance and loved each other by choice, who proved that the strongest medicine is sometimes simply being seen and valued by another person, and that the greatest adventure is building a life with someone who makes you want to be better, do more, and love deeply. Their story lives on, a reminder that in the Wild West of 1878, amid the violence and the struggle and the uncertainty, the most remarkable thing that happened was two lonely people finding each other and choosing to heal together.